Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are joining us from. And welcome to the first inaugural lecture for the GPOD's Summer 2021 cohort. Again, a big congratulations to all of you who have become part of the GPOD's family. And today we have a very special guest, a person who's truly been an inspiration for me personally. And I'm sure for a lot of us who've been interested in education policy, especially higher education in India. I have with me Mr. Pramath Sinha. Hi, Pramath. Thank you so much for taking out the time for this. Let me first introduce Pramath, although no amount of introduction would do justice to the kind of feats that Pramath has achieved. But then let me try my best to do that the best that I can. So, Mr. Pramath Sinha is the founder and chairman of Harappa Education India, and the founder and a trustee at Ashoka University. He is also the founding dean and a member of the executive board of the Indian School of Business, which rapidly became one of the top 20 business schools in the world. He's a pioneering force in Indian higher education, and he is known as one of the most successful institution builders in the education sector in the 21st century. Pramath has been the CEO of the Anand Bazar Patrika. He has been a partner at McKinsey and Company. He received a PhD and an MSc from the University of Pennsylvania and a BTech from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, where he was honored with the Distinguished Alumnus Award in 2018. Pramath, thank you so much for taking out the time with us and agreeing to share your experiences in the Indian education sector with the GPOD's fellows.
Thank you, Arpit, and thank you very much for inviting me. And congratulations. I understand that you just started this program, and it sounds like a really exciting program. I'm envious of all of you having received a very boring technical education in my time. So congratulations and all the very best.
Thank you. So the way that we are going to do this is I'm going to ask Pramath a few questions. And so this is going to be a fireside chat between the both of us, after which we will leave it open to our fellows in the audience to ask their questions if time allows. While doing so, we'll just unmute you. You can raise your hands when you are ready with your questions, and we'll unmute you, and then you can ask your questions straight away to Pramath. So, Pramath, my first question to you is, we've been absolutely inspired by Ashoka University. I remember that, I was working in a consulting firm called Right Management right after my MBA, and my undergrad was in history from Delhi University. And when I was working in this consulting firm, one day I just look at the newspaper and I see that, okay, this liberal arts private sector university is coming up. And I was pretty kicked about it. So I just wanted to know from you directly that what was your vision in setting up Ashoka University, a liberal arts university in India, where a lot of focus in the past decades has been on technical skill-based training. So Amish, that sort of a dominant educational paradigm, how did you think about setting up a liberal arts university in India? And what do you think is the importance of such a thing?
How long can I take to give you that answer?
As long as you need, Pramath. Well, really, maybe just 5 minutes.
I'll give you a simple answer. And the simple answer is that it's actually not about technical versus liberal versus humanities versus science. It's really about going back to what higher education was meant to be about and should be about, and in fact needs to be about, given the world that we live in.
Right.
And if you go back in history, then most people got educated in a school and then they joined a profession. School was always meant to teach you how the world worked. So you needed to know that 2 times 2 equals 4.
Right.
You needed to learn the rules of a language to be able to communicate. You needed to understand that the earth was round. You needed to understand the concept of gravity. So school was to, of course, shape you in other ways, but it was primarily meant to make you understand as a human being and to be a functional human being and to be able to contribute and do something meaningful for your life, that you understood the basics of how the world operated. When college was invented, it was more a purview of the elite, that you could contemplate life, that you could think about who you were, what your purpose was. And it was a time for you to be able to discover yourself.
Right.
So in fact, it was always about the elite and the rich and the privileged who could afford to do that, because most people needed to earn a living and feed themselves and their families. So they, college was for the at least in ancient Rome and Greece and so on, it was really the philosophers and people who had idle time to kind of discuss.
The landed elite.
The elite, right? Somewhere along the way, I think people evolved from there to say, hey, this is how you truly discover who you are. You discover your own voice. And then you go forward in life. And that then leads you to make a difference to other people's lives, to make a difference to the world. And you become, it's your ticket to do something that goes beyond just following a profession.
Right.
Now, and by the way, the great universities that we in India know so well about, of Takshila, which was about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, Vikramshila, Nalanda, which was around till about 9th century, were all about that. So you would go to these universities and they were highly multidisciplinary. You could study medicine and astronomy. You could study Buddhism and Islam. You could study agriculture and you could do metallurgy. That was when the idea of different subjects and professionally related subjects came in, but it was more with the same idea that, hey, so what if you want to be a doctor, you can also learn astronomy, right?
Right.
But somewhere along the way, we became about, hey, you really need to specialize as a doctor, or you only need to study engineering and become an engineer because that's where the jobs are. And we subverted the idea of higher education into professional skills and technical training. Technical training was always received through apprenticeship, not by going through a university. You wanted to become a management consultant, you go and work for a management consultant. You wanted to become a doctor, of course, we'll teach you a few things, but you go learn, and that still exists in the medical profession, in the law profession, in the accounting profession. It's all apprentice-based. But somehow we decided somewhere along the way, and I don't know when it happened, where we said, oh, higher education is going to become a conduit or a direct link to a career, and that to a career in a particular discipline. And that was assumed that that is the career you will follow for the rest of your life. So I studied metallurgical engineering. The only metallurgy I did was when I was asked to turn around a steel plant as a management consultant. Never worked as a metallurgist ever in my life, but I spent 4 years studying it. So now we've gotten to a point where we are all studying stuff, but not really working in that area. So who came up with that model, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many people you know who studied civil engineering are civil engineers? So we are now back to a point where I think people are disenchanted with studying stuff that they were never interested in. They are being forced to study it, and they are not using much of it.
Right.
That was the core idea behind Ashoka. So the idea was that if you want to take education back to where it started, then you need to give people choice, and you need to give people a variety of subjects to study from, to learn from, to explore, and you need to give them flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Choice, multidisciplinarity, and flexibility are really at the heart of the liberal education pedagogical method. That's what Ashoka is about. It's not about humanities and social science subjects.
Right.
It's about this approach to education. So now what happens is, unlike any other institution in India, when you apply to Ashoka, you don't apply for a major.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those of you who have been educated in the United States, this is a given. But by the way, in India, this is not. Ashoka is probably the only university, and a few are following us now, where you don't have to choose a major when you join. Can you imagine? We have over 1,000 universities in this country, and we have 55,000 colleges. But wherever you go today for admission, based on your marks or your test scores, you are assigned a subject that you need to major in. It's not really your choice.
Right.
And then once you take up that subject, you only study that for 4 years or 3 years or 5 years, whatever the degree is. You can't change. Changing is very difficult. You have to go back to the beginning and start all over again if you want to change. Can you imagine? Can you imagine getting into MIT and saying, oh, I was admitted into English, but I will not be allowed to switch to computer science, or I was admitted into computer science and I will not be allowed to go study history if I wanted to. Of course, there are some minimum requirements. You have to be good academic standing and so on. So this flexibility is very important. And how do you know what to choose and how to be flexible as an 18-year-old? You have no idea what you don't know. So unless you go in there and you understand what history really is, and history is taught by somebody interesting and not the boring high school teacher that you had who read out from the book in every class, you'll never know if you loved history or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's with all of this idea in mind that we set up Ashoka, and the vision is to really allow people to be the best version of themselves through an environment that gives you choice and flexibility, and gives you the chance to make your own choices about what you want to study, and allows you to make mistakes. So you go in there and you choose computer science and you say, oh my God, this stuff is just not for me. And you take this one history course and you say, oh my God, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. You may never do that for the rest of your life and may change your mind two years later. That's okay. But how do you develop as a human being if you don't make mistakes, screw up, make bad choices, but in a safe space where you're still part of a university, you can switch and you can still get an undergrad degree. So I'll stop there. I think I've gone over and I still feel like I haven't done justice to the question, but that was the core of it. And the fact that this was not available to our students in this country and was only available to those who could afford to go abroad and study in other universities around the world.
Right. And about what you said on, thinking this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life, I think a career for life as a concept is too soon quickly dissipating. And, that's not something that we'll probably, most of us in this room may not have just a single career in our life. We might just have 2 or 3 as we grow.
10.
10. Okay.
You can write it down somewhere in your journals. Each of you are going to have 10 almost distinct careers in your life.
Wow.
Firstly, you're going to work much longer than I do. I will.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad thing, by the way. I'm not saying it because you will need to work. Some of you may not need to work, and some of you will retire early, and some of you will go and contemplate the world in the Himalayas.
Right.
That's fine. But most of you will have 10 different careers.
Prabhat, just a follow-up question on what you were saying earlier about the vision of Ashoka. I was just thinking, and this question has pestered me for many years, that I remember, for example, that my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather going to universities like the Allahabad University, which they held in pretty high esteem. And from what I remember reading through my history books since I was a history undergrad, Allahabad University at that point of time, and for that matter, even Aligarh Muslim University, held some really renowned and solid faculty, at least in the liberal arts disciplines, what I know of. Where do you think that some of these liberal arts institutions, or in general, some of these higher education institutions, went wrong in our country, and then they started declining? Because today, if you see, you can just count a handful of universities which are still holding on to the kind of glory that they had in one point of time.
Again, my view is the root causes of that decline are in the governance of these institutions. And I hope that many of you who will go on to be part of institutions, and more importantly, will set up institutions, will think carefully about, when you set up institutions, think about the governance. And governance is really about how are those institutions run, who takes decisions, how are calls taken. And the reason the governance got destroyed is because the governance became politicized. And somewhere along the way, the politicians decided to control these universities through the bureaucracy.
Right.
Which then led to regulations and laws. So there's a whole chain of command that got created, which completely straitjacketed institutions and to some extent subverted them by saying, okay, so you have a fellowship program, Arpit? Oh, nice. You have a board of advisors. Well, guess what? Why don't I appoint Srihari, Anjali, and Tamari onto the board of advisors of your fellowship program? And through them, I will make sure that you are not, taking all these young people, gullible people for a ride and, promising them something and dishing out something bad.
Right.
Because I don't trust you, Arpit. I don't think you're going to do a good job. I know that I need to protect the interests of these 50 odd fellows that you have, and I'm going to do it through Srihari, Anjali, and Tamari. That's when it all went south. So suddenly now most people have no freedom to do what they want. To innovate, to hire the best teachers, to not be straitjacketed by the rules and the guidelines and how education should be done. When the whole premise was that, hey, education is about letting people discover themselves.
Right.
There is no should. The only should is you should be the best version of yourself after 3 years or 4 years. Now that's harder to do, by the way. But there's multiple ways to do that, and that's where the innovation happens. You let people do it their own way. A German university does it very differently from a New Zealand with a university in China or Japan or Ukraine or England or the United States or even Canada. I studied in the US and worked in Canada, and I hated it because I loved the US system, and across the border, the system was very different. And that's fine. So we've completely straitjacketed our system, and not just liberal arts. Look at the IITs. I went to an IIT, and I'm telling you, I spent 4 years studying metallurgical engineering when I had zero interest in metallurgical engineering. And the only reason I chose metallurgy is because I couldn't get anything else because of my rank in the exam that I took on a hot summer day, where I could have done better if I had maybe cooled myself down, or maybe if it had rained that day, and maybe I would have gotten the choice of subjects. But for whatever reason, I got up on the wrong side of the bed and didn't do so well and got a bad rank. And therefore, I was stuck studying something that I had no interest in for 4 years.
Well, the same argument goes for the UPSC, the civil services exams in India. You have a good day, and there are certain facts that you know of that appeared on your paper, and your nobility for life after that.
Correct.
Which,
so I'm not complaining. I do want to set the record that I'm very privileged to have gone to that institution, and it's got its brand name behind me, and I've got associations and so on. But I could have done something that I really wanted.
No, coming back to the governance issue, I remember the story about when you were setting up the Indian School of Business, and this was published in some background material I was reading, and I read the story over there that you visited 3 chief ministers, in a day or in a very short period of time, and while you were looking for the right state in India to set up the Indian School of Business in, and one of the chief ministers came out to meet you, garlanded you. The other refused to meet you at all, and the other demanded that you guys should garland her over there. So tell us about the story, and in general, what in your experiences, the understanding about higher education amongst the Indian political elite, irrespective of the parties, though. Yeah.
No, the political elite really gets it. They know that our country needs high quality educational institutions. So I can tell you that whenever I have met the political elites and political parties, I've had tremendous support and enthusiasm. Every politician would like to build a Harvard in India or an Oxford in India, whatever, right? And they get it. They get it. But the problem is that they also see it as a source of power. They also see it as a way to exercise their authority, because they know that it's in such great demand. They would like to be able to say that, hey, I can influence the admission of a kid or employment of a professor because, this is a university in my state, or I exercise control. So because it's such a coveted institution or a coveted service, if I can call it that, the people want to somehow own it or be associated with it. Everybody wants it. But equally, everybody wants to control it. And moreover, you see, there's a big problem. The other big problem with education is, and I think we all suffer from this bias, all of us think we are education experts, right?
Yeah.
We all think that, oh, I know what needs to be fixed in education. You give me a school to build and I will make sure that, the kids get educated properly. And you give me a chance to go run a university and I'll show you how people should be taught.
Yeah, even in public policy, like I used to interview candidates for the Indian School of Public Policy, and I think 70% of them would want to work towards education policy, and that's perhaps because they've faced the brunt of an imperfect system over there, almost everybody.
But, it's a little bit like saying that, if I got a bad surgery done on myself, that tomorrow I'll start doing surgeries on you.
Yeah.
Since, education is a profession. Let's not take it lightly. You can't walk into a classroom and start teaching if you don't have the right to do that, if you're not properly trained. Who gave you the right to go into a classroom? A classroom is a hallowed place. You have a chance to influence 50 people. Thankfully, this is not a class, so I can say this. But the truth is, I think that education is as much of a profession as medicine is, or law is, or chartered accountancy is, for which people go through years of training. And so how do you assume that you are an expert, that you know how learning should be delivered? And so this is the other problem that politicians and in general have, right? They see this as a very important uh, tool for social change and for driving, progress. But they all bring in their biases, that how it should be done.
Yeah.
So that again spoils the pot when it comes to the involvement of politicians. But in general, to answer your question very, very simply, I think most people don't get it, that if you really want to build a great institution, let it be. Let it go. Trust people. You want to control it, control the outcome, right? You beat me up if the quality of people coming out of my institution is not what I promised.
Right.
You beat me up if the accreditation agency says that this program is not run properly. But don't insist that I should do this, that, and the other when I'm building the institution, that I need to have so many acres of land, I need to have so many buildings, I need to have so many bathrooms, I need to have so many toilets for, so many computers, and so many books in my library, and so on and so forth, right? Focus on the outcomes, not on the inputs.
Yeah, that also, with those requirements, it makes it even more prohibitive for young entrepreneurs to get into something like this. But
Yes.
Pramath, another thing I remember, that when we had a short call earlier, we were discussing this question that why do you think Ashoka and ISB were exceptions but not the kind of a rule in how education is done in India? We still know, we know that ISB was a success story. It became one of the top 20 business schools across the world. Why don't we see so many ISBs springing up in the nation? Because there's so many entrepreneurs who can put in their money over there. There's so many states who would want to have an institution of eminence such as ISB. Then why don't we have such private institutions just popping up everywhere?
Governance, or poor governance. I'll tell you, the big thing about both Ashoka and ISB is the governance model. If you look at the great universities of the world, who owns them?
It's,
nobody owns them.
Nobody.
Literally nobody owns them.
Yeah.
Unique governance model, right? And the reason they've done that very effectively is that everyone owns them. Everyone thinks they own them. Faculty certainly think they own them. Alumni feel ownership.
Yeah.
Students, while they're there, may not feel ownership, but they certainly feel like they belong. There's a very strong feeling that, alma mater, the word comes from that, right?
Yeah.
So, and Ishan was just telling me he went to Stanford. Leland Stanford's name is there, but is there a Leland Stanford family still involved? No. Nobody even knows who Leland Stanford was. Now, the reason these universities thrive and grow from strength to strength to strength to strength, rather than the institutions we see here, which actually seem to get worse and worse with time, right? Start with a bang and then it's downward from there, is because there is collective ownership. It's very difficult to govern anything like that, right?
Right. You need a lot of sophistication in terms of your governance thinking over there.
And so since all of you are in essentially what is a leadership program, let me tell you, these institutions are where they are because we follow what I call a leadership model that is about leading a collaboration. Different from collaborative leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about leading a collaboration. So Arpit, you and I are collaborating in this fireside chat right now.
Right.
Okay. But suppose we started to disagree about something and go hammer and tongs at each other. What happens then? Who's going to control us? And then if Ishan also jumps into that conversation and he has a third point of view, who's going to manage this collaboration? Goes for a toss, right? As long as collaboration works, but very quickly breaks down when people have differences and can't agree.
Right.
But this is where you need either one of us or somebody to be leading our collaboration, who stands above all of this and says, hey guys, stop. You're all saying the same thing. You have the right intent, whatever it is that it takes to actually then get us back on the same page. That's what building these institutions needs, is a person who is constantly leading the collaboration between lots of different owners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a key skill that is lacking in a lot of the other institutions that you are seeing not being able to move forward. Because on one hand, you're getting a lot of good ideas, collective ownership, donors, support from multiple quarters, politicians, partner schools in the US, local government, regulator, all of that. But this whole system of an ecosystem needs to be led by somebody. And the leader who leads the collaboration has to have very special skills. Mm-hmm. They have to sometimes let go of their own agenda. And that is really hard for you as a leader to do. You almost have to see that by doing something, people are going to fail, but you let the institution, well, you won't let the institution fail, but you let people stumble before they will recover. Mm-hmm. When you know that you could have intervened, because you want to keep the coalition, the collaboration together. And this happens at all big institutions that I know of, right? You don't see it from the outside, but inside somebody is. So I don't want to become too philosophical about this, but I do think that having a right governance system in place, having a leader to lead that governance system. And by the way, that's why in most university systems, you see this constant, rotation in that leadership model, right?
Right. Like the president who.
That's right. And often there are term limits. So in India too, for example, in most institutions, the chairman or the vice chancellor or the chancellor has term limits.
Right.
But again, other parts of it are broken. So that doesn't in itself solve the problem.
No, I think leading a coalition is also something that sort of applies to the whole society as well. And, I was just reminded of this whole thing that we used to study in a game theory course, and I covered that in our fellowship. But this was essentially back at Cornell when Kaushik Basu would talk about the problem of cooperation in the society. And the real thesis was that, societies wherein there are institutions where the problem of cooperation is essentially solved, or conflicts are able to get resolved with as less friction as possible. Those are the societies that see a rise, and they don't fall into a suboptimal sort of an equilibrium, which kind of reminds me of this historian called Sallust from Rome, who wrote that small nations where there is a lot of bonhomie, they rise, and even larger nations where there is bickering, they are gone and dusted for very easily. So that reminds me of that. But then again, moving on to the kind of work that you've done, one question that when I was doing some of my background research and I was asking around your ex-students and your ex-colleagues and current colleagues, one thing that they recommended that I should ask you is about what you perceive as the connection between your own institution building trajectory in India. How would you think that ISB, Ashoka, and now what you're leading, Harappa, how are they connected, and how did you kind of move from, again, setting up a business school to a liberal arts university, and now a company that focuses on things like how do you write an effective email, how do you you know uh, convey your point in a meeting. Take us through that trajectory, please.
So there are certain principles and that run as a common thread, but maybe a trajectory is a better way to describe those principles. So when we set up ISB, I was just setting up a B school, right?
Right.
And however, I was quite conscious of the fact that I actually was working in a company that most of these MBAs would covet working in, but I didn't have an MBA. And yet I had been successful. I worked there for 13 years, and most people don't work in McKinsey for more than 4 or 5 years or don't survive. So I had always been affected by this thing that, you don't really need an MBA to do a management job. But that an MBA should be viewed as any other higher education program. So I did my PhD in robotics. And the question is, what did that do for me? Because I never worked in that sector afterwards. I did, by the way, and I'm a failed academic. But my point was that when I look back, I did learn a lot. And I learned how to get deeper into a subject. And a PhD really teaches you how to do that. For 5 years, if you have to think about a problem and constantly think about it, it drives you nuts sometimes.
Yeah.
But it gives you a certain resilience and a certain tenacity and a certain set of probing, problem-solving skills that you would not learn otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So moving forward, when I was building ISB, I was very acutely conscious that, hey, it's an MBA, but it should be like any other sophisticated postgraduate program. People should have that same postgraduate experience. So I tried to stuff in lots of stuff that you would not get in an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
Like leadership skills. Like we had a required leadership skills program. Mm-hmm. I got some of the best trainers from around the world to run that program in the first year. We put in experiential learning, which was not there in those days, where people had to actually do a project for a client. Right through that 1 year. It was called the ELP program, the Engagement Leadership Program.
Yeah, I know my elder cousin went to ISB, and she was pretty kicked about the ELP program that she did over there.
Correct. Now, I also brought in this course on government, society, and business. Now, you would say, well, other schools do that too. But you know what? We actually brought in a business guy to do that course and not talk about how government operates. IIMs had always had a course in that.
Yeah.
But how, if you're going to run a business or you're going to be in a business, by the way, the biggest value creator is the regulator in most businesses. You take telecom, you take airlines, you take energy, you take infrastructure, you take banking. The regulator controls most of your value creation. I can teach you multiple ways to calculate cash flows and stock prices and so on, but you can never model the value that a regulator creates or destroys. Some people need to understand that. Nobody was telling them. The kind of political system or political party of the day, and in India, the politics of the state determines your value creation. And whether the politics in the state aligns with the politics at the center determines your value creation. This doesn't happen in the United States even, by the way, which has the same federal system. So I think understanding these nuances from a business perspective, I felt was very important. And I was able to bring that because I didn't have a business degree. And I could see how business graduates in my teams would just not get this, because they said, if the Excel model shows this should be the stock price, this should be the stock price. But you can't model 90% of the stuff. It's just directionally right. Otherwise, it's garbage in and garbage out. So bringing this sensibility was very important to me. But what also happened is that I realized that once the academics took over, and it is a one-year program, so you don't have a lot of flexibility. All those elements got thrown out. And the students were the worst enemies, right? Because they would come in and say, why am I learning this stuff? My friend who goes into that school doesn't get this. I'm wasting my time. I should be learning about derivatives. Right? So essentially what happened, the student pressure of what an MBA should be, and the faculty pressure, who are all trained in a certain way, slowly started diluting all these new elements that I'd brought in. And I've continued to fight that battle. I sometimes win, I sometimes lose. But for example, that government, society, and business course is not a required course anymore at ISB. And I'm most pained by that. But going back to the leading the collaboration model, I'm a founder and I'm a founding dean, and I could have come in there at the board meeting and said, guys,
this
on my dead body. But I didn't do that. I felt sad. I put in my word, and I'll keep trying to persuade people, but I couldn't do that because that would violate that larger principle. But coming back to your trajectory, that's when I said, listen, we need an undergraduate education that breaks this rigidity. And a 4-year program allows me to do that much more. And that's how Ashoka, and I've already talked about, taking that same idea to the other extreme. If I had my way, I would say design your own major. But I don't think the world is, and there are some universities that do that, but I don't think we were ready for that yet.
In the future, maybe.
Right. So I brought in a lot of that flexibility and so on. But that's when some of the ideas for Harappa had started to form. Because I saw the MBA graduates from ISB, and I realized that, what really drives success at work is your ability to think, your ability to problem solve, your ability to communicate, your ability to work with people, and the degree of self-awareness and growth mindset that you have. Now, I've clubbed it into these 5 areas, which is the central core of Harappa.
Right.
But I came to these 5 through my experience, and you can make it 5 or 10, or you can club them different. I firmly believe that these skills are absolutely foundational for your success. I believe by then I had started to believe that anyone can actually do anything. It's not a cute phrase. It's not something that parents and teachers say to motivate your kid. Listen, I obviously don't mean that everyone can do everything. I also don't mean
if I'm a bad singer, I would not be the...
Correct. Correct. So, I'm never going to be a Formula One race car driver, or be a neurosurgeon, or, climb Mount Everest. But hell, I can do lots of things. And the reason I can do those things is because I can think, I can problem solve, I can communicate, I can work with people, and I'm humble enough to say that I don't know, but I can figure it out.
Right.
Now, but people don't tell young people these things, right? Imagine if you knew when you were 20 that, listen, metallurgy matters, learn metallurgy because it's good for you. But what's better for you is if you learn how to problem solve. Now, what is problem solving? We used to be in IIT, and we used to think we were problem solvers. We had no idea of real world problems. We didn't know that not all problems can never be solved. Some problems can never be solved. And by the way, problem solving is all about trying out something, realizing it doesn't work, and then trying out another thing, and knowing that you will never get to the solution. So nobody tells you these things. Nobody tells you that 3,000 years ago, Aristotle came up with Aristotle's appeals. It's a simple idea if you put into everything you say or everything you write, which is logos, ethos, pathos.
Yeah,
Then you become an effective communicator.
absolutely.
I didn't know this till I was 52 years old. I talk to my academic colleagues, they say, you teach people how to give and receive feedback. Can you tell me what that is? This is the dean of engineering at Penn, who's a personal friend. He said, what is giving and receiving feedback? I said, well, here's what it is. He was blown. He said, my God, I have to give feedback to all my faculty colleagues, and I have to review performance of all the staff and, to my PhD students. I wish I knew it was this simple. Nobody taught me this.
Damn.
So I realized that somewhere we were missing out. Now, if you go to the pure academics, they'll say, really? We need to teach that? Aren't you guys supposed to learn this yourself? Well, that's the problem with the world. Most people are not getting the life experience where you would learn all of this for yourself. Because you are studying all the time, you are under pressure to perform well and to crack that exam and get that score. And so, yes, this is remedial, got to be done. And I was finding that through my Ashoka and ISB experience, ISB has 1,000 students a year. Ashoka right now has about 700, 800, 25 years of work. And all I'm able to do is explain this to 1,800 people a year and do a half decent job of teaching them. I said the only way to solve this problem is to only teach this and do it online so that I can get to as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
And that's how Harappa came about. So that's been the journey, right? The journey is really, this is core. Everybody needs to understand this. I may not do a perfect job of teaching you how to speak by doing a Zoom call.
Yeah.
At least I've taught you Aristotle's appeals. It's a powerful idea. And you can go out and start practicing that tomorrow. I can teach you how to give and receive feedback. You can go and start practicing out. It'll change your life. You'll never be scared of feedback anymore. And even if you are, you'll get beaten up a few times and you'll get used to it. So I think that's the journey that I'm on. And I don't know if Harappa will work, but it certainly has been heartwarming to see that suddenly in the last 2 years, 60,000 courses on Harappa have been completed. And people have given a rating of 4.5 on 5 to these courses. And I'm not saying this to boast. I truly am not. I'm only saying, imagine the impact you can have. I don't think collectively ISB and Ashoka have in 25 years been able to impact 60,000 students. Now, of course, these students have not done a 1-year program or a 4-year program, but at least I've touched them. Now I'm in touch with them. They're hooked. I can give them more. I can talk more about this stuff.
Right. No, I have to tell you, there's never a time when I open my Facebook or Instagram and I don't see a Harappa
Sorry
video.
to spam you.
No, I love watching those videos. But I was also thinking just, to go back to something, just an observation over there, that when you were saying, especially in India, about the governance program at ISB, that it is absolutely essential to learn how regulators would treat you, especially in a place like India, where, the state government could be absolutely different and coming from, a fundamentally different mental model on how to deal with businesses as opposed to the central government. And what surprises me is how few political risk management consultants and companies do we have in this country. Like, you have all sorts of consultancies, but political risk management is, absolutely something that somebody should come up and explore.
And start with a mindset that political risk can't really be managed, but you try.
I know. But okay, so another question over there is, you try to set up a higher education institute after ISB in Vadodara, And it did not work out apparently from what the media reports due to the high price point over there. So what do you think about the models to fund higher education where there is obviously a lot of demand for high quality education in a country like India, but then in terms of what the pocket allows or how education falls into the order of priority, it becomes really, really hard for people to fund themselves or fund their children to really gain quality education beyond perhaps some of your IITs or some of your other government institutions. In the private sector, you see a lot of institutions where private universities, which could be affordable, but then they can't really be called super high quality. And on the other hand, it's sort of bimodal. On the other hand, there are the others which could be fairly expensive, but high quality at the same time.
Yeah, so there are the traditional ways of funding, right? Where there's, of course, the government that pays for our education and subsidizes education and so on. There are philanthropic donors who fund large institutions like ISB and Ashoka and continue to fund through philanthropy scholarships.
Right.
Fee revenues, of course, for people who can afford to pay, can also be used to cross-subsidize. And we do that a lot in Ashoka and ISB. We follow a model where you may be paying a rack rate because you can afford to, but it's actually higher than the cost of the education. And some of that surplus is being used to subsidize somebody else's.
Yeah.
So all of that is well known. But I think the fundamental notion that I want to somewhere think that we need to change people's perception is that, honestly, I have not yet found a program that is so expensive, and maybe it may be true for some programs in the West, in the US in particular, where costs have become
I'll probably pay my Cornell loans until I'm 40 years old.
Right. But if you leave that aside for a minute, the extreme cases, the truth of the matter is that the returns that you get from getting a good education far outweigh the investments that you make, even in cash terms, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
The problem is the cash flow, right? The timing of the returns. Because when you need the money, you don't have the money. And so you have to forego the education because you can't borrow against the future.
Exactly.
I think that we are going to have to create more models that allow you to borrow against your future earnings. That's the way, that's how people fund MBA education, by the way. Most MBA education, where people have a greater clarity on cash flows. Yeah. Students or parents don't hesitate to take loans. And what are those really? It's a cash flow model, right? It's borrowing against the future. At ISB,
the kind of salaries they're going to get.
So. Correct. So at ISB in 25 years, believe it or not, Arpit, there hasn't been a single default of a loan, not a single default of a loan. Banks die to lend to ISB students because they make humongous profits, because all the costs that are built in on account of defaults for them are zero.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to bring that kind of ethos into all education, and by the way, the ISA models in the US and now happening in India, especially with, very interesting, the income share agreements. And many people are now doing that. Lambda School started it in the US and they've been involved in some controversies, but that model has now been started to be imported in India. There's a organization called Masai Schools that takes people who may be from underprivileged backgrounds and give them coding training, right? It's all based on an ISA model, right?
So essentially, you pay back once you start earning.
You pay once you start to earn, right? And it's really 10-15% of your income. And I'm looking to start an ISA model MBA-like program or leadership program at Harappa. Why not?
Interesting.
Right? And that once you get that model going, it kind of feeds on yourself. So what I'm taking the risk of funding my own cash flows for the first couple of years.
Right.
But after that, you've got that engine going, right?
Yeah.
And as long as students are not sort of, if you're delivering to students, students will be very obliged to you and they will pay back just as they pay back. And now actually the banks are coming in there as well. And they're saying that what will happen is the moment Arpit completes the program, I'll pay Harappa and put Arpit on a EMI scheme because now he's got a job. So he's basically paying out. So there's multiple models that are emerging to take care of this. And I would urge all of you to think about, some of you to at least think about doing something about this. Because it's really borrowing, you are going to have the earnings. You are going to make the money if you're going to invest in a good program. Don't throw away money at a program that is poor quality. And that will also weed out poor quality programs if you think about it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one great challenge with especially higher education is that you have again the problem of lemons, and eventually you have a whole sector just filled with subpar quality institutions most of the time, because there's so much information asymmetry on what is up for offer and what it really is. But I absolutely get what you're saying on the ISA models and borrowing against the future. It's just that we'll probably have to think as to how would some of the programs which are, so for example, if it's a degree in music or if it's a degree in philosophy, which doesn't really pay you immediately, I'm sure if it's high quality it will eventually pay you out. We'll need a lot of trust in the system to get that going.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think it'll also get, the model will get disaggregated, Arpit. So, but taking this model a bit forward, right? Today, a person can't get that degree in philosophy because they have to invest 3 years at this point in their life. And it all comes lumped together. But what if you could study philosophy over 10 years and not have to do it in 3 years?
Interesting. Never thought about it like that. So, Pramath, if you had just one wish to come true for the Indian education system and the Indian education policy /or, what would that be?
Autonomy. Don't tell us do multidisciplinary education, give everybody a holistic education and build universities that will have 5,000 students. And listen, just tell us to build good institutions and let us be free. And if I'm not doing a great job, shut me down.
Yeah.
Let an independent accreditation. By the way, this is how the university systems are run anywhere in the world. By the way, Ishan doesn't know this, but he went to Stanford because the Northwestern academic group of accreditation in Northwestern California accredits Stanford.
Nobody would know that.
Yeah. That's how Stanford is accredited, not by the state of California or by the Trump government.
Yeah.
It's a completely independent institution, and it's held accountable by this nondescript body that none of us know about. But they have to go through the accreditation process every few years.
Yeah. Like for public administration programs, it's NASPA that accredits, and absolutely autonomous, has nothing to do with any government.
But we have one accreditation body in our country, and that too is part of the University Grants Commission, which is actually the regulator and licenser. So it gives you the license.
That's the big problem.
It sets the rules by which you will operate, and then it says, go get accreditation from this body that is, by the way, owned by me. Talk about leading collaborations. So I think that we need autonomy, and we are so scared of autonomy because we think if we give autonomy, all these gullible teenagers will be taken for a ride by these scheming, corrupt educational institutions. What people don't know is that students and parents are much smarter than that.
I mean, for all of that planning and control, whatever happened to our engineering students? There are just so many of them, and like I just come across so many who
for all that
don't get
planning and control,
jobs.
as I saw somebody mention on the chat, she's from Norway. He is from Norway, I suppose. Of course, we are way behind, right? Because we for all that planning and control, we haven't been able to crack the problem. So we might as well give up and start afresh and learn from the way Norway or England or Australia, where all our students are going and getting corrupted by their corrupted system. We might as well actually bring that system
Corrupt
here.
our own.
And by the way, I think on a positive note, I think we have a real opportunity to completely reinvent how education is delivered, because honestly, a lot of the systems that exist around the world, for them to change is very difficult.
Yeah.
They're also seeing tremendous demographic headwinds, where enrollments are going down and that it's a question of survival and so on. Here, there's infinite opportunities to build educational institutions and programs. And imagine when you have that kind of opportunity in front of you, how much can you innovate, how much can you change and make things afresh and completely reinvent the whole education system. That's the opportunity we have in our country.
Absolutely.
And in other markets like Africa and parts of Latin America and Southeast Asia.
The global South.
Latin America, by the way, has done that with a lot of its, in many countries, with very interesting models.
I mean, Costa Rica has some really interesting universities over there, which is doing pretty good. But thank you for that comment in the chat box, Jan. Maybe we should, put our heads together on how we can bring in some of the Norwegian education thinking into India. I think now it's time. I do have more questions, but now it's time that we open it up to our fellows. And if you have a question, I already see Anshul raising her hand. So Anshul, would you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Anshul, I'd also request you to introduce yourself briefly so that Pramath has a bit of a context of where the question is coming from.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thanks to GPOD for having Pramath sir with us. The insights we got today are learnings for life. And I'm Anshul, and I'm an IT professional. And my goal is to work in education policy sector with the intersection of data science. So I am an 2021 admit at University of Warwick in behavioral data science. I'll be going for my master's this year. Okay, so my question is that as we know, education institutes are still struggling with focusing on attitudes and behaviors of students. So what is the reason India is still far from implementing social and emotional learning in its curriculum?
Well, the designers of curriculum don't get it, Anshul, right? The problem is that how does curriculum get set in a typical university? A bunch of existing professors come together and they decide what the curriculum is. Now, the training of professors, as you know, is very specialized. Most of them are PhDs. They would have worked in their area. They think their area is sacrosanct. And most of the battles they will fight or contributions they will make is to say, how will my area be taught to these students? Now, part of it is again that because we haven't innovated the model, we need somebody like Anshul, and there are people like Anshul, but we need Anshuls on the governing bodies of these institutions to say, hey, we should be thinking about social emotional learning. Now, how do we incorporate social emotional learning into the curriculum? We need to bring in some people who understand and who are champions of social emotional learning on the curriculum committees, on the boards of studies that these universities have to set curriculum, right? So again, it's a change process. And I don't mean to put down professors. I'm half one myself, and I'm guilty as charged. But I do think that you need going back to the governance and leadership model. You need a governance model where people recognize that universities are slow to change, and that the role of the governing bodies and the governance leadership is to drive that change and to push for that change, even while giving people the room and space to come up with, to drive their own agendas. So I think the answer comes back to that, and maybe I'm like a broken record, but it comes back to how decisions get made and how do you allow for evolution, innovation, change in that decision-making process. We were just talking about people having 10 careers.
Right.
Are universities really thinking about how their students will have 10 careers? If they are still saying, choose your major, get so many credits. For what? Why do I need 12 credits out of 40 to be in a major? What does that mean? Who came up with 12?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think those are some of the big changes. But you see, when you're setting up something new, then you have the chance to actually build that from scratch before, of course, the rot sets in, and hopefully you don't have the rot set in.
All right. And now we have the next in line is Srihari. So Srihari, over to you.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Hello, sir. So I am Srihari. I am recent graduate in law. And since you were talking about governance and we discussed governance at length, I was wondering about your opinion on student bodies in governing the educational institutions. And the other question I had, it was about infrastructural requirements, which you mentioned in your brief interview, where you said that there are a lot many infrastructural requirements which a university needs to adhere to before it starts its operation in India. So my question here is, if there are no such infrastructural requirements, such as there is no minimum requirement of, let's say, toilet for girls, how do we ensure that there are enough toilet for girls or any other gender? So these are my two questions.
Sure. So on the first one, sorry, your first, I'm just having a blanking out moment. Your first point was.
So how about students becoming part of the governance?
Oh yeah, student unions and how listen, student unions have to focus on making sure that students have the best and most fulfilling learning experience on campus. That should be their 1-point agenda. They can look at adjacent points about ensuring toilets for girls and other gender and so on, because that's part of the learning experience on campus. But most student unions become activists.
Mm-hmm.
They become aligned to political parties. And I have a strong view on this. It's a personal view. I don't think there is place for politics and religion on our campuses. And I know this is an international audience, so I don't want to make it too India focused. But the truth is, we do not in India have the maturity to deal with these issues on campus. We should focus on learning and education and make sure that we get the very best, demand the very best, be activist about that. But not get into bringing external factors and politics. Now you will say, well, we are citizens of the world. We have to have academic freedom. I need to have a voice. Well, on your own time. But as a student union and a group of representatives of students, keep that out of the student union. As an individual, you can say whatever you want. You can be an activist, you can write, speak, do demonstrations. But as a union, you should be focused on advancing the cause of learning on campus. That's the view on the first question. On the second question, listen, I'm not saying throw out the requirements at all, but let the governance model of the university or the accreditation body figure that out. And by the way, the biggest accreditation body are going to be the girl students. Hey, if you don't put it in, I'm now talking university, I'm not talking schools, right? But for a moment, let us imagine why girls would not come to your university, right? And sooner or later, somebody will point it out and say you're losing half the population. And if you have a half decent governance model, some people on your governing body will say, what's happening? Now, you may turn around to me and say, Pramath, this is all a very esoteric notion because there are some areas where they don't have the choice of universities. So they are forced to go to that university, right? Well, I think let the students protest. Let the student raise it with the governing body. Let the accreditation agency come in. Let somebody come in. But equally, what is happening is that people today are subverting the system and they're showing the infrastructure and getting the approval for starting universities and then providing a pretty shitty education. And that's not on either. So I think there are ways around these problems. I'm not suggesting you throw out all compliance and controls. But today it has become only about that. And that can't be. I can tell you that the inspection that happened at Ashoka University, there was not a single consideration of academics. For the library, we had to show invoices of how many books have I bought. Numbers, not quality. Hey, please come and inspect. But if you want to come and inspect, and the guy who came to inspect us came from an engineering library. Right. So he had no basis to inspect us. All he did was he went through the invoice just to make sure that the books that we had placed on the shelves were not put as books that had been borrowed from somebody else's for that day to show off and get the checkbox, right? Now, by the way, you will say that, well, some people do that, Pramath. That is why they have to do that. Well, guess what? They do that because they can get away with that. Because you couldn't check whether my books were legitimate or not at all. You just checked by looking at my, bills. So I think we've got ourselves tied up in knots here. And I think this is a solved problem around the world. Even in England and in Norway, people worry about poor quality education. And they found a way to get around that without controlling the system that you drive the system to the ground. We are reinventing the wheel. We should be actually innovating. We should not be rediscovering how educational institutions should be run. I'm not saying copy from the West, but I'm saying take it forward. Yeah. What's done is done. Adopt it and move on. Let's do some new ways of doing. Let's put in ISA models across the country. Let's put multidisciplinarity and choice and flexibility across the country. That would be revolutionary. Not trying to figure out how to control institutions.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm talking too much and I know there are lots of hands up, so I'll limit my answers.
And on the first bit that you said, just to quickly add to that I think the student union and political has also been one of the factors that led to the doom of some of the better universities earlier in India, such as Allahabad, Aligarh, etc., etc.
Yes, and I think that Alif is making the point about Indonesians, and by the way, that has happened in India too. I lived through the period of dictatorship, almost a dictatorship, and an emergency in India in 1975. It was a student-led movement. but we were able to, we did that, but it completely destroyed the education system in my state forever.
Well, now those students are in the government.
Right? And you know who they are, like Lalu Prasad Yadav.
Yeah.
Right? So again, these are not easy answers and one cannot generalize. But those were unusual times. I think Suharto was an unusual time. The British colonizing us was an unusual time. But at least in the steady state, I think the student union should actually focus on making sure that the learning happens.
Yeah. So we'll take Shrishti, Ishan, and Santosh. Pramath, do you want to club their questions? Let them
I'll
ask
write them.
the
I'll write them
questions
down
quickly.
and
Yeah. So Shrishti, and then Ishan, and then Santosh. Go ahead, Shrishti. Okay, Ishan, do you want to go ahead?
No, Shrishti is now.
Okay,
unmuted.
Shrishti, perfect. Yes.
I was able to unmute myself. So hi, Pramath. It is always enlightening listening to you. This is the third time I'm listening to you live. The previous 2 times were during the Anubhav lecture series in 2019. At that time, I also got to talk to you about the Harappa project, which was just starting around that time. So presently, I've secured a PhD position, which is offered by the European Commission under the Marie Curie Fellowship. And I'm starting that. Otherwise, I have over 3 years of work experience in the social development space. Some of the work has been in the school education. So my question is related to, actually, there was a suggested reading, which was a YouTube link, which was shared with us. And it was your 2015 speech at the Jindal Global University, where you talked about how management courses are not able to, make students ready for the education or for what they'll be doing. And how a lot of the issues they'll be dealing with will be ambiguous. So I wanted to understand if, by way of the Ashoka University or the Vedika Scholarship, Scholars Program, I don't know why you guys did not talk about it, and the ISP University, the school, are you able to bridge that gap? And I had another question, I forgot about that, but yeah, I guess this would be enough for now. Thank you.
All right, so I think we'll go to Ishan and have his question, and then Santosh's question, then we'll club them all.
Then
Ishan,
I'm sure we'll run out of time after that. So Ishan, over to you.
So, thank you so much for giving us such a insightful talk. So I come from social work sector. I've worked very closely on ground, even relating not exactly the education, but logistics of education. I've worked in projects related to logistics of education. But my question is not too much into that. My have 2 questions. My first question is a bit of a personal thing. So you talked a lot about leadership. You talked a lot about governance and everything. My question is related to where does personal discipline and habituation of that discipline in your daily life figure out in all of this in your personal philosophy or all through your life? What has your experience with that? Because to achieve big things, we from the Aristotle's view that to achieve great things, you have to habituate it in your daily life. That is the first question, and the second question is related to the gap between the school education and the higher education. So again, from my own personal experience, when I completed my school, I had no heck of idea what I wanted to do. Parents were pushing for engineering. I didn't know. I went for volunteering and everything. So, in your opinion, what could be done? Should something be done at the school level itself, that by the end of school education, people like young people, 18-year-old, who have no idea about what's going on in the world, get some idea of what they wanted to do, or should they be given some time in between before they get into college, and how should that system work? So yeah, these 2 questions are there. Thank you so much.
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
Ishan, let me also piggyback Jairaj's question. His mic is not working. It's pretty similar to yours. But Pramath, basically, Jairaj has the same question, that would it be more productive if we include such sort of discussions at a at a lower level, at the high school level, before inculcating it in the college and university field. Anyway, moving on, can we go to Santosh? Santosh, really quickly.
Quickly, please, Santosh. Over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Pramath. This is Santosh here. I also have majors in mineral engineering from IIT ISM Dhanbad and worked as an engineering consultant for a couple of years doing feasibility and pre-feasibility studies for diamond processing plant and zinc processing plant for some of the coveted organizations across the globe. And then I changed my sector to management consulting. And currently I'm working with a startup as a data scientist. My question mainly revolves around so yeah, I mean, like most of the folks in India are currently focused on if they're able to bag a better lucrative job or not. And by the fact, like I have a couple of my friends, in fact, many of my friends who have degrees from exotic branches like aeronautical engineering, naval engineering and ocean architecture, environmental engineering, engineering physics. But these people again land up at IT jobs or software jobs or some kind of data science jobs. Uh, Now, if there is no enough market in the country for to accommodate the graduates from these specializations, won't it really lead everyone's stream, or won't it like it's kind of channelizing everyone's streams to only one particular sector? So how do we actually tackle this challenge in the current scenario?
Okay. Let me take some of these quickly. So I think the first question was by Srishti about dealing with ambiguity. I think the only way you train on how to deal with ambiguity, Srishti, is by dealing with situations of ambiguity. And the more such situations you deal with, you realize that you have to go back to the basics each time you feel you run into an ambiguous situation. And that's where things like critical thinking and problem solving and root cause problem solving comes in, which, for example, starts with defining first what the problem is rather than getting into solving the problem. Now, teaching someone that, whether at ISB or Ashoka, at Vedika or at Harappa, has been my mission. To say, hey, hold on, heal, figure out what Srishti is really asking. What problem are you really trying to solve? Or do you have a solution that you're trying to bolt on to a problem that you think Srishti was asking? So throwing people, now what multidisciplinarity does is it constantly changes problems on you. And each time you are thrown a problem which you have no clue about. So you start from scratch. And that then trains you into saying, let's ask basic questions before jumping to conclusions or jumping to an answer or finding a solution. So that's my answer to your issue. And that's the thing. I mean, what you can actually do about this is actually go into unfamiliar areas and allow yourself to be flummoxed or confused, because that's the only way you'll deal with ambiguity. I mean, look at what happened with Corona, right? Suddenly, all of us now know how to deal with ambiguity or not, as the case may be. So that's my answer to your question. I think Ishan and Jairaj, absolutely, we have to go back to school. I am doing a remedial program. I told you that. In fact, I'm actually coming right after all the formal education is over. Harappa should not exist. Harappa should not be there. I do want to do Harappa for kids. It's just that I'm too dangerous on kids because I don't know anything about school education. And by my own admission, who made me an expert on school education? So I'm focused on 20-somethings because I somewhat understand that. But completely agree, this stuff shouldn't be taught. Why should I have to teach people how to problem solve when they're 25 years old or 35 years old? You will not believe it. All our courses are written for a 25-year-old. Please don't say this out publicly. But 1/3 of our people taking our course are 25 to 35, and another 1/3 are 35 to 45. Harappa is completely remedial.
Yep.
If you ask me, this should have been done way back when they were 10 years old. And I'm admitting to you that that's what it really should be. So that's my response to you.
Pramath, I must also specify and point out a bit of an anecdote. It is with Arpit's habit of mentioning and calling GPODs as a rehabilitative program, with my vocal displeasure about such terms being used on a regular
I say we turn into an engineering rehabilitation center at times.
No, we are allowed to poke fun at ourselves, right? Okay. I think Santosh, you make a great point. You know, if everybody wants to do IT, who's going to do naval architecture? Well, why don't we ask people that before we make them do naval architecture? That's the problem, no? Now, you will say, well, people still want to go to IIT, ISM Dhanbad and get that stamp. And honestly, they only care about that stamp. They don't care about naval architecture. Well, I think IIT, ISM has to change its model and worry about that. But you see, the faculty who are teaching there don't care. I mean, they do care. They complain about people not getting core jobs, but do they really care? Because they really cared, they did something about that. So I really do think that the simple answer to this is going back to my point about choice and about allowing people what they want to do. And if the truth of the matter is that you also don't need to major in a particular area at a level of specialization at the undergraduate level. Maybe the time has come to make naval architecture a master's program.
Right.
So I think, but you know, we should, if you had the right governance in place and you let IIT, ISM make its own calls, I'm sure people like you would give them feedback, and smart people like you one day would be on their governing bodies and you would figure it out. But today, there is no way for you to influence that, because a bunch of people sit on the board of IITs who have nothing to do with IITs, may not have ever gone to an IIT, may not be an engineer, and don't know anything about education. There goes your governance model. So I think that's the immediate response to that. And in terms of personal discipline, listen, I'm a procrastinator. I am lazy. And I love watching anything that happens on any moving image. And with this OTT world, with Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, and Disney, and what have I missed? Mubi and Lionsgate. I'm a basket case. And I am constantly fighting to be disciplined. It's a constant battle. So I think we have to find our own ways to be disciplined. But we should stop feeling guilty about not being disciplined. Because that's the biggest problem to being disciplined.
Yeah.
So I would say, give up trying to be disciplined in everything. Cheat a lot. But pick one or two things to be disciplined about. And if it is working, then really go after it. I tried for 13 years to lose weight. In my phone, I have my weight, my personal weight data from 2013 January. But you know what? Since February 28, 2020, I have lost 20 kilos. This has been the silver lining for me during the pandemic. And when I suddenly realized that because I was not traveling, I was eating healthy. I was walking every day, and suddenly I was losing weight. I just grabbed that and I've held on to that for the last 18 months. And I've set personal goals and I've driven that. And it's tough, right? But I've just focused on that one thing. I'm I'm completely undisciplined about everything else, including the amount of talking I'm doing on this call. Right? So I would say don't feel guilty about not being disciplined. That's the first thing that will hold you back. Pick one or two things and try to be disciplined about. Fight a few battles. Don't go to war about discipline.
I think, we have run out of time. There's
that's
just
what I was
one
going to
quick.
say. Pramath, I think we would have to follow you around for a bit again. Try to keep our time because the questions keep pouring in, and I think if we carry on answering the questions, we'll go into the next lecture, which is scheduled in a bit. So I think we'll have to stop.
But first of all, Pramath, thank you so much for that very honest answer about discipline, because it makes me absolutely uncomfortable about our overt obsession about being disciplined in everything that or about narrow productivity over just exploring and not even producing anything out of that exploration. I think that there's a lot of value to doing nothing sometime.
Arpit, on that note, I also want to specify, and during the course of the fellowship, the fellows will hear me rant about this a lot. But I think all of us across the globe make a very, very major mistake of confusing productivity with creativity. And we must not do that. It is all right to be unproductive if you're being creative, and if you're just introspecting and ruminating if you can. So, and I completely agree with Pramath. I think guilt is the most tormenting factor when it comes to not being productive yet being creative. So we must avoid the guilt.
Yeah. So Pramath, before I deliver my final vote of thanks, there's just a quick request from one of our fellows who says that Ashoka should offer a PhD program in political science and IR, and she wanted to just put this idea in your head.
It'll come soon.
All right. So finally now, thank you so much, Pramath, for taking out this time. This has been an absolutely amazing discussion, and something that I'm sure we'll discuss for a long time. We have something called a virtual cafe where we just sit and do our adda of sorts in this fellowship. So I'm sure you've given us a lot of fodder to discuss. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me very thoughtful and difficult questions. And apologize to anyone where you've been waiting to ask me something and you couldn't, but I hope we'll get another chance. Anyway, what I have to say seems very profound, but it isn't. You can discover this for yourself. So don't worry. You haven't missed out on anything. I wish you all the very best. Do remember as a parting thought that you can really do anything. You can't do everything, but you really can do anything. All the best.
Thank you, Pramath.